Hello and welcome back to History, boys and girls. Hope Christmas and New Year's is all nice and fun for you. We all got a chance, hopefully, to recharge our batteries, and we will be back this coming Monday. And again, this is the video which kind of precedes our class and gives a overview of what we're going to be discussing on Monday and kind of give you an update on where we are in this. It's called medieval history, but we've been focusing on what's called the Dark Ages for the past several weeks. Again, that period after the end of the Roman Empire, when Europe, our part of Europe, Western Europe, was fairly fragmented. A couple of the lessons we're going to be looking at this week begin the process of moving from, say, the Dark Ages into the medieval period. A couple of the segments that we're going to be talking about today, one of the big, a couple really, of the big historic figures which began a sort of unification of Western Europe and kind of a recreation in its own way of the old Roman Empire. We're going to start by going back a little bit and remembering a lesson we had a few weeks ago on the formation of the Islam religion. You'll recall Muhammad, the goat farmer, who began having visions from God and started not only a new religion in Islam, but also a new nation of sorts. It was, and I think we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, it was very spectacular, the speed with which Islam spread throughout the Mediterranean and up and down the Arabian Peninsula, even into southern Spain. Remember us talking about Al-Andalus, that region of Spain, which was predominantly Muslim by the 8th century A.D., and really flourished for the next several hundred years. They were kind of the driving force behind our first figure that we're going to take a look at today. A guy by the name of Charles Martel, who was nicknamed the Hammer. We'll know why in just a few minutes. And basically, Charles Martel's main claim to fame historically is more or less halting the spread of Islam. And it never got the Islamic Caliphate, which is what we will call the areas controlled by Islamic rule, never got further than Spain because of Charles Martel. He was a mayor of a town in the kingdom of the Franks. They were, if you have a good memory, one of the several Germanic tribes which contributed to the end militarily of the Roman Empire. And they had maintained a sort of a loose nation, so to speak, along modern-day France and Germany. And like we said, Europe, for the most part, was very fragmented. Really, the church was the only unifying force. If you went from one kingdom to another, there was not really a common language. There certainly wasn't a common currency, which really prevented them from growing. But the kingdom of the Franks did have a sort of ruling system there. Oddly enough, the mayor of the Franks had more power, really, than the king of the Franks. The mayor controlled the military, which, at this point of history, if you controlled the military, you pretty much controlled everything else. It was primarily a Christian kingdom. Again, Christianity flourished within its geographical confines. Charles was officially a duke, a prince, and a mayor, but not a king. But the way things were structured, he had more power than a king. And he was primarily concerned with spreading the power of the Frankish kingdom, and he saw the church as an avenue to do that. Again, if he wanted to expand Christianity because he wanted, honestly, people converted to Christianity, that's quite noble. But to use the church as a means to expand your own political and military power, I think we can all agree that that is wrong, but that is exactly what he did. Inevitably, because of the geography, they and the Islamic Caliphate, Al-Andalus, over in Spain, they were going to clash. The Pyrenees Mountains is the natural boundary between France and Spain that, of course, still exists today. And when the Islamic Caliphate began conquering areas immediately outside the Pyrenees, that's when the Franks began to notice, and they knew it would take quite a significant military effort to keep this army from geographically spreading. And again, remember, Islam had spread a lot in just a matter of decades, not even centuries, but just decades, which is remarkable for this point of history. It was in the year 732 when Charles Martel's forces met the Islamic forces at what we now call the Battle of Tours. And long story short, the Franks won. They pushed the Muslims back into Spain, not only into Spain, but even in the southernmost point of Spain. As a result, Charles got the nickname of the Hammer, which is Martel in French, thus the nickname. It begs the intellectual question, what if the Muslims had won the Battle of Tours? There probably would not have been much militarily standing in the way of the Islamic Caliphate spreading throughout Europe. France, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, Italy, Austria. You get the idea. How different would history be if the Muslims had won the Battle of Tours? A lot of people look at this and call it sort of a warm-up for the Crusades, which we will be talking about a little bit later. What if? We don't know. But it is not a weird idea to assume that if the Muslims had won the Battle of Tours and been able to make major geographic inroads into Europe, history would have been an awful lot better. There are some people that suggest that because of the Battle of Tours, we in America in the 21st century are not bowing down and praying to Mecca 5 times a day. Maybe a hyperbole, maybe not. It's not that far-fetched. Suffice to say that in the course of what we call Western history, the Battle of Tours was absolutely crucial. If Tours is lost, Western history looks a whole lot different. Lord knows what will happen. Anyway, after Charles Martel, one thing he did manage to do was he really strengthened his own personal power. You win a major battle like that, you're going to have a lot of cred afterwards. Again, he was a mayor. His son, Pepin the Short, actual name, was a strong leader too. And it was Pepin who actually got his family, the Martels, the title of King of the Franks. And he did this by going to the Pope of the Western Catholic Church, Pope Leo. And again, much like his father, Pepin the Short realized that the church, because it was so expansive, would be a great ally to have, marrying the crown and the cross, as it were. One of the reasons we have separation of church and state and we protect it jealously these days is because that kind of power is just begging to be corrupted, and it was. But again, long story short, Pepin the Short, no pun intended, got his family installed as the king of the kingdom of the Franks. So in addition to having the military power he had before, he had the title now. And it is Pepin's oldest son that we remember well, again, moving us, beginning to move from the Dark Ages to the Middle Ages. A fellow by the name of Charlemagne. Now, I know I'm 54 years old and out of touch and whatever, and when I went to Google some images on Charlemagne, the first 200 hits were on this YouTube influencer that you probably know, Charlemagne the God. It shows how out of touch I am. I just learned about him today. Anyway, I guess I'm not his intended audience. This is Charlemagne, not the god, but the king of the Franks in the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries A.D. Again, we mentioned the fact that Pepin had cleared the way for his family to be declared the king. In short, Pepin, we go back a generation again, Pepin, because the Pope supported his claim of being the king, Pepin gave the Pope a large gift in return. The donation of Pepin, ding, 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 remember that, created the Papal States. And for the first time in its history, the Western Roman Catholic Church now owned land, just like a small country would, or a large estate owner. It was a change in the direction of the church. Again, the church was a system of priests, bishops, and archbishops led by a pope, and of course, converting people to Christianity. Now they were a landowner. Now they were a player in political and even military affairs. Is that proper for a church? We can talk about that on Monday. Pepin died in the year 768. Charlemagne inherited the empire that year. Charlemagne, one of the most painted figures of his time. Evidently, he was 6 feet 4 inches tall, which is tall today, but at the time it was likely almost gigantic. It would be the equivalent of being 7 foot tall today. I mean, extremely tall. Blonde hair, blue-eyed, handsome, chiseled features, all of that and much more. I mean, he looked the part of a leader, if there is such a look. There was much to admire about Charlemagne the leader. He had some skills. He had a lot of good qualities insofar as he was one of the, really the first historic figures to look at education as something that should be free and available for everyone, not just the rich. And even though that's something we accept as very normal now, in the year 789, that was a very radical idea. But Charlemagne was obviously, because he was from a well-to-do family, was highly educated, but he also saw the benefits of having lots of educated people around you. Again, one of the first to insist that education not only be available, but that it be free, at no cost. Again, a very, very, very radical idea for the time. He made himself, actually, he also required that monasteries and abbeys and places like that, he required them to have a school. So we still see the sort of the remnants of that policy today. I mean, how many colleges in the world, even in the U.S., were founded by Christian-based institutions? That idea really originated with Charlemagne. He saw the church's role not just as political, but also having a role in standard, dare we say, secular education. And of course, I mean, the homeschool co-op that we operate runs on that same principle. So yeah, this idea was born, 1,600 years ago, or 1,400 years ago. I got to get my math right. With Charlemagne, he set up in the border town of Aachen the Aix-la-Chapelle, really a great center for learning, and because the kingdom was successful, it became really the first great center of learning in Western Europe during the Dark Ages. Again, we talked about some of the libraries that were established in Spain and under Islam. This was the first great one with under Christianity. And again, Charlemagne tried to marry the church and the crown, church and state. And again, it's not all bad. In this case, the literacy rate really shot up. Of course, it was next to nothing before all of this. Charlemagne also was evidently a very good administrator. Again, he could manage resources very, very well. That's a gift. Some people are fantastic at other things, but are very wasteful when it comes to resources, human resources, tangible resources. He developed a justice system which included a fairly new concept, the concept of a jury of your peers. Again, something we take for granted today that is so ingrained in our system of jurisprudence. It originated really with Charlemagne. Now, again, we talked about ancient Athens, remember, and how they would have court cases where litigants would argue for hours and hours sometimes. There was no jury system in ancient Athens. Charlemagne helped develop the idea that the best judge of a case is a jury of one's peers, a number of people, that have to be 12, who have no emotional or financial investment in an outcome. They are the best arbitrators of justice. And these were very much new concepts in the Middle Ages. So the idea of a jury system, jury-based system of justice, originated really with Charlemagne. I mean, if he did nothing else, that would have been remarkable. But of course, we talked about the literacy. And of course, quite frankly, he was a successful conqueror. If you look at the geography around the kingdom of the Franks, it mostly occupied about half modern-day France, half modern-day Germany. He brought to heel a lot of his immediate neighbors, and as a result, the resulting Frankish kingdom was the largest autonomous ruling entity in Europe until this fellow named Napoleon came on the scene about 1,000 years later. Charlemagne's empire stretched from Spain to really into modern-day Poland, northern Italy. Again, the Papal States were in Italy around Rome. So Charlemagne really had quite a geographic empire. As we talked about, he married his power with that of the church. We'll talk a little bit in a second about that. First, I want to get off. We've said some glowing things about Charlemagne, and they're all true. Like just about everybody else in history, there are bad things. Very, very, very bad things about Charlemagne. He was very ambitious, again, marrying his power to that of the church in order to get more powerful. As he conquered new lands, he forced people to convert to Christianity or be killed. Remember all the times in history we've had these stomach-turning examples of Jews killing Christians, Christians killing Jews, Muslims killing Christians and Jews. It's no better when Christians kill non-Christians. And he did it. He did it a lot. He went so far as to give the death sentence to people who didn't observe days of fasting, who ate meat on Fridays, which is more of less a Catholic doctrine. Those who refused baptism, he would have them killed. Not a good guy. One time, he massacred 4,500 of his enemies after they had surrendered. So he was a mass murderer too. Again, history is rarely black and white. Again, we've talked about folks like Gregory the Great, who are the exception. They are very much the exception. Someone as driven as Charlemagne, 9 times out of 10, they are driven in a bad way as well. That same drive which caused him to create a great center of learning, to create a very good system of justice, that same drive also produced stuff like this. That is history. It is untidy. Literally the crowning glory of Charlemagne's career came in the year 800, Christmas Day at St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. He was at Christmas Mass. He bowed down to pray, and the Pope, Leo III, the same that granted kingship to his father, came up to Charlemagne and put a crown on his head and declared him Emperor of Rome. Yeah, that's a big step up from being King of the Franks. It was, again, the attempted resurrection of the old Roman Empire, except this one would be married with the church's power, thus the name Holy Roman Empire. It was popular with the people because, again, Charlemagne, despite these atrocities with his people, the one against whom he was not committing atrocities, he was very popular. He died 14 years later, in the year 814, and as history has taught us, a good ruler's or a powerful ruler's sons are quite often not their fathers, and the kingdom began to break up, began to go into disarray. The slow, steady dissolution of the Franks began quickly. The Holy Roman Empire, though, that concept continued for several centuries after this, and we will talk a lot more. The Holy Roman Empire, of which Charlemagne was the first emperor, began to gain power. It was very much like the old Roman Empire had been resurrected from the dead. And a whole lot of what we talk about from here on out is going to be under the Holy Roman Empire, the church, the Crusades. We're getting to that. But you see the formation of it here. Going to close out this week with something much lighter than mass execution of non-Christians. We're going to go back to the Islamic Caliphate, Arabia, if you want to call it that. The Islam empires. Basically, there are kind of two Islamic empires. We mentioned the one in southern Spain, northern Africa. The geographic larger one encompassed the entire Arabian Peninsula and up to the eastern side of the Mediterranean, modern-day Iraq, Iran, Turkey, beginning to move westward towards modern-day Pakistan. Again, a rapidly growing caliphate country. And one of the rulers in about 750 moved the capital of the eastern part of the Islamic Caliphate, the Arabic, from Damascus, Syria to Baghdad. Baghdad is presently the capital of Iraq. And it quickly became one of the largest and most amazing cities in the world, probably second only to Constantinople, of course, the Byzantine Empire capital. It was during this time that there was, again, when there's some stability, some predictability, the arts flourish. And there were some fantastic works of art developed, none more enduring than the 1001 Nights, Tales of Arabia. Images we have today of flying carpets, open sesame, opening a door, rubbing a magic lamp and getting a genie, all of this came from Arabic culture, and all of it really came from the 1001 Nights tales. Now, there was not a book that said, here's 1001 Nights. It was a series of stories developed over the years, but the centerpiece of the story was the same. A queen named Scheherazade made up the stories of Arabian Nights as a way to stay alive. The legend goes, now this is fiction, this didn't really happen, but the legend goes that the queen, Scheherazade, was engaged to marry a Persian king who had a very strange custom. One of his wives evidently had previously been unfaithful, so the prince would take a wife and then kill her the day after their wedding. Again, it's fiction, chill out. But faced with that, Scheherazade wanted to stay alive. So she came up with the idea to tell her new husband a story, but then end the story right at a cliffhanging moment, so he would keep her alive another day so he could hear the end of the story. Kind of a wild concept there. I mean, this is a literal cliffhanger that she had to come up with, the story goes, 1001 different stories to stay alive, and each one of them had a cliffhanger ending that her husband wanted to hear the rest of it the following day. And of course, as the tale goes, during that time, 3 years roughly, the prince fell deeply in love with her and changed the law about killing her bride. So it worked. The end result, though, was a collection of stories that, again, were so popular and really just so fun that they have lasted for 1,400 years, and we're still talking about these stories today. The legend of Sinbad the Sailor came from the Arabian Nights. Sinbad here's a poor beggar who's jealous about him being so rich, and so Sinbad invites him to listen to his stories about how he got rich. And according to Sinbad, he became rich by these great tales of daring do and whatnot, riding on the back of a giant mythological bird, defeating one-eyed Cyclops to continue. A lot of these sound like they come from old Greek culture, and there is a lot of borrowing, but the idea of Sinbad the sailor on his adventures, that's from Arabian Nights. The phrase open sesame came from the Arabian Nights. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. He saw thieves going into this cave hiding gold, and he went up to the cave door, tried to get in, could not. But he overheard their magic phrase, "Open Sesame." And so he entered the cave, and eventually Ali Baba made his way into the cave and had the riches for himself. The legend of Aladdin is from Arabian Nights. Now, Aladdin, of course, we know the Disney movie from 30 years ago. Hard to believe it's been that long. And we always have him pictured as a handsome Middle Eastern guy. In the original story, he was Chinese, oddly enough. Not that that matters. Again, the idea of genie coming from the lamp to grant 3 wishes is part of modern pop culture today. It all stemmed from the Arabian Nights, and again, it was a collection of people. It was a collection of stories. Kind of weird, though, in that other cultures would reproduce the 1001 Nights tales and add a lot of their own. So throughout history, if you went to France and bought a copy of 1001 Nights, it would have the original ones with a few others. If you went to Japan in the 19th century, it would have that and a few others. Every culture has sort of adopted the idea of 1001 Nights and added their own flair to it. So it's an enduring piece of art that has most definitely stood the test of time. We'll talk a little bit about it on Monday. Talk a little bit more probably about Charles Martel, Charlemagne, and the marriage of the state and the church. We'll see you on Monday.